What is going on, everybody? What is going on, the Catch fam? My name is Jon Dawson, and in today's video, we are breaking down my top 10 early rankings at the running back position heading into the 2022 fantasy football season. If you do enjoy today's content, be sure to hit that like button down below. Hit that subscribe button if you're new to the channel. Come join the Catch fam on the road to 1,000 subscribers, and feel free to drop any comments, questions, concerns pertaining to the 2022 fantasy football season, as well as any comments on what you guys think of my rankings overall down below as well. Without further ado, let's hop right into today's video. All right, number one overall, no surprise, I've got Jonathan Taylor. I don't think you're going to find a single fantasy ranking out there that does not have JT number one, and if you do, he is definitely coming in at the number 2 spot. Overall, just an absolute monster last season, just an absolute monster season last year as well. Number 1 running back in standard and PPR scoring formats. Overall, 1,800 rushing yards, 18 touchdowns, 360 receiving yards, and 2 receiving touchdowns. Just a monster, incredible year. And obviously, guys, naturally, there's probably going to be some regression heading into 2022, but at the end of the day, JT is probably without a doubt the safest lock for a top 5, probably arguably a top 3 running back in 2022. So I think there's just no doubt that he is my running back one. There's not a lot of discussion to be had here. If I am drafting with the first overall selection 2022, there is no doubt in my mind that I am taking JT as my first player overall and easily my first running back in my rankings heading into 2022. Number 2 overall, I've got Derrick Henry, who I know has fallen back a little bit on rankings, but overall, you're still seeing him in the top 5, top 4 consistently. Obviously injured last season through 8 games, finished with 937 rushing yards, 10 touchdowns overall. We know that he does not offer that PPR upside, not really getting involved in the receiving game, but he just doesn't need to. I mean, think about it this way. He had 8 less rushing touchdowns than Jonathan Taylor, and he played 10 less games than Jonathan Taylor last season. He was on a phenomenal pace last season. He may have outpaced Jonathan Taylor if he was healthy throughout the year. In my humble opinion, I am not worried about him re-injuring his foot. If he had, a knee injury or something a little bit more serious, then I would maybe be a little bit more hesitant around Derrick Henry, but I've always been a huge advocate for Derrick Henry. If you guys remember last offseason, I had him a little bit higher. I had him number 2 going into last season. I don't regret that whatsoever. I'm not personally worried about wear and tear for Derrick Henry heading into 2022. I think he will be just fine. I think he provides far too much upside for me to personally pass on him if I have that 1.2 spot overall. Speaking of possibly passing on Derrick Henry at number 2, probably the only player I would consider is Austin Eckler, who came in as your RB2 in standard and PPR scoring formats last season. And the advantage of drafting a player like Austin Eckler over Derrick Henry is that he does offer that nice PPR upside. He had just a phenomenal season in that Chargers offense, which really took a step forward last year, and I think will continue to take a step forward in 2022. Overall, 911 rushing yards, 12 touchdowns on the ground, 70 receptions off 94 targets, 647 receiving yards, and 8 receiving touchdowns. Out of all the running backs we've gone over so far today, he easily offers the most PPR upside. And if you are of the belief that the Chargers are going to take a step forward next season, then there is no reason whatsoever to not feel bullish on Eckler. I think he's going to have a great season in 2022. I'm very happy with him at the number 3 spot overall heading into 2022. All right, number 4, we've got Najee Harris, who had a phenomenal season in his rookie debut. Number 3 running back in PPR, number 4 in standard scoring formats, right at 1,200 rushing yards, 7 touchdowns on the ground, 74 receptions off 94 targets, and 467 receiving yards with 3 receiving touchdowns. He had 307 rushing attempts last year, just absolutely crazy. So for those of you worried about some comments being made that he might have a lighter workload next season, I would not be concerned. I think they're just trying to maintain the young running backs' health. 307 rushing attempts is quite a bit, so I would not worry about that. For those of you guys worried about these stories about him being heavier going to the season, I don't know, man. I think it's just all off-season chatter. I think at the end of the day, especially with Big Ben retiring at the quarterback position, the Steelers will be leaning on the run game, whether Mitchell Trubisky is the QB1 or Kenny Pickett. I think that Najee Harris is going to be the focal point of this offense. Out of all the running backs that we've gone over today, if there is a candidate to take a step forward into that #1 running back spot at the end of the year, I think that you could easily argue for Najee Harris with how much youth he has at the position as well. So I love Harris overall. He's got some nice PPR upside, and he had a phenomenal year on the ground last season. I just think at the end of the day, the Steelers are going to have to utilize him heavily. So I think he's a safe pick within the top 5, and I like him at #4 overall heading into 2022. All right, let's address the elephant in the room. At #5 overall, I've got CMC, Christian McCaffrey. Just played 7 games in 2021. Through those 7 games, 442 rushing yards, 1 touchdown, 37 receptions off 41 targets, 343 receiving yards, and a score. I mean, in full PPR, those numbers really aren't that bad. But listen, guys, I might be a little bit biased here. Don't get me wrong. I had CMC as my selection in my personal league at 1.1 last season, and he really hurt my team. Although when he was healthy, don't get me wrong, he played phenomenal last season. The amount of points he averages in a fantasy game on a regular basis is just ridiculous, guys. We know what CMC offers when he is fully healthy, but I personally am just not there. There comes a point where I am happy to take a chance on Christian McCaffrey. You guys have seen me taking him in some mock drafts throughout the offseason just to offer some diversity within rosters and see what happens throughout the rest of my draft. I do think if you secure the right running backs throughout the draft, he's worth the risk, but you guys just have to understand that drafting Christian McCaffrey comes with a lot of risk, but it can also come with a lot of reward. So if you want to take advantage of that potential reward, then I'm not going to knock you for it, but I am just not personally there. There are probably a couple running backs outside of the top 5 that I will consider drafting before I drafted Christian McCaffrey, just because I'm looking for that consistency, right? Played 3 games in 2020, so it's been 2 full seasons since we've seen him play a full season, and I really have seen him start to skyrocket in fantasy rankings all over the place. He is #2 or #3 in most rankings. There are even rankings out there. He's probably the only running back that I've seen in rankings out there where he actually comes in at #1 overall. So CMC is a very controversial topic at the running back position. I've got him a lot lower than other rankings out there, so let me know in the comments down below what you guys think of that. But I'm just not personally there in terms of taking the risk, and it's no disrespect to the football player that he is when he is healthy. He is obviously one of the best fantasy players we have seen in years, but he just gives me too much concern, so I'll bring him in at running back #5 heading into 2022. At #6 overall, we've got Joe Mixon of the Cincinnati Bengals, who I really think you could argue could be in the top 5. Personally, like I said, if there is a running back who I would consider taking over CMC outside of the top 5, for me, it's Joe Mixon. Listen, guys, this offense is going to be even more explosive, in my humble opinion, in 2022 than they were last season, and they just went out and they revamped that offensive line all off-season long. And obviously, Joe Burrow is going to benefit from that at the quarterback position, but at the end of the day, man, I think Joe Mixon is the piece of this offense that people are not considering who is going to benefit from those moves at the offensive line as well. And on top of that, this is your RB4 and PPR last season and your RB3 in standard. I really don't understand why he's not getting more buzz heading into 2022. Through 16 games, had just over 1,200 rushing yards, 13 rushing touchdowns, 42 total receptions, 314 receiving yards, and 3 total scores. I am a huge fan of Joe Mixon heading into 2022. I've been a huge advocate all offseason long for going out and targeting Joe Mixon. I'll happily put him at #6, and part of me thinks that I could have him a little bit higher on these rankings overall. All right, #7 overall, we've got Dalvin Cook, who I know is a little bit higher on some rankings out there. Maybe I'm sleeping a little bit on Cook as a whole. Last season, through 13 games, was your RB #16 in both PPR and standard scoring formats. Just over 1,100 rushing yards, 6 touchdowns on the ground, then added 224 receiving yards off of 34 receptions. Should be fully healthy heading into 2022. Had some injuries last season, but Dalvin Cook, through the last couple of years, has always had injuries, right? So you kind of know when you go out and you target Cook that you might miss him for 3 or 4 games, and that's why Alexander Mattison is one of the most popular handcuffs at the running back position in fantasy football. So I love Dalvin Cook. I really do think that offense is going to take a step forward with the coaching change. I love the receiving core. The passing game for the Vikings will be just fine, but I do think that they are going to continue to utilize the running back position in the run game pretty heavily as well. So I like Cook right at #7 overall heading into the 2022 fantasy football season. Okay, guys, know that I could not get through these rankings without putting my boy James Conner in the top 8. Guys, I was crazy about James Conner all off season long. He was one of my must starts week after week. Took some convincing for you guys last season, and guys, did it pay off? This was your RB number 5 in PPR and standard last season, and now you've got Chase Edmonds exiting the building. And I get it, you add Darrell Williams to this offense, you've still got Eno Benjamin on this roster as well, but I am not worried about James Conner whatsoever. He gets the extension. I mean, I think he's just going to have another great season. I think naturally you'll see some regression, don't get me wrong, especially in the touchdown category, but I think he's going to have a great year. I don't get why he's being so overlooked heading into 2022 as a whole. Last season, 752 rushing yards, 15 touchdowns on the ground, 37 receptions, 375 receiving yards, and 3 touchdowns through the air. I mean, he just had a phenomenal season. Like I said, week after week, I was begging you guys to start James Conner, and week after week, he just continued to perform, and he did all of that through just 15 games last season. So I love Conner. If he can play a full season, I mean, I really think he just holds tremendous value, especially at his current ADP. He has been one of my favorite running backs to target in mock drafts throughout the offseason, one of my favorite running backs to advocate for all the way through the offseason. So I love James Conner as a whole, and I am completely comfortable putting him as my RB8 heading into 2022. At number 9, I've got DeAndre Swift of the Detroit Lions. Last season came in as RB15 in PPR scoring format, playing through 13 games, had 617 rushing yards, 5 rushing touchdowns, 452 receiving yards off 62 receptions, and 2 receiving touchdowns. I just like kind of the upside that is involved with Swift. I know he missed some time last season, but he was on pace to be a top 5, top 6 running back when he was healthy last season. So I'd like him to continue that pace, but I also love the Detroit Lions offensive line. I really think they're one of the more underrated units in the league at the moment. And I like a lot of the moves that the Lions have made defensively and at the skill position for that offense as well. So I think the Lions are actually going to have a pretty decent year, even if they're not winning a ton of football games. I think they're going to be very fantasy relevant. And I like Swift right at number 9 overall. I think he's a really good value where you can currently draft him as well. And I think it presents a little bit of nice upside as well. All right, number 10 overall to end today's list, we've got Alvin Kamara of the New Orleans Saints. And I get it, guys. Listen, we have the report coming out. Alvin Kamara could face a 6-game suspension. Listen, guys, this is not news to me. That article that came out didn't provide anything new to me whatsoever. We already knew that Kamara was probably going to face a 6-game suspension at the least. So I really don't understand his current drop in ADP, because when he was going at the beginning of the second round, mid-second round, in some drafts, still at the end of the first, depending on how many teams were in those mock drafts, we already knew that he was facing a suspension. So now we have an article coming out and a report coming out that he is likely to face a 6-game suspension. Okay, we already knew that. And for me personally, I've been saying this all off season long, right? Last season, Alvin Kamara missed 4 games and still came in as your RB8 in full PPR. So if you think about it, if he misses 6 games this season, he could still easily finish in the top 12, in the top 10, right? So I like him at number 10 because he just offers far too much upside when healthy to not be considered a top 10 running back, even if he misses 6 games. So I am not worried about the suspension, and I don't mind his current drop in ADP if that's how people are really feeling about it, because I like targeting him, especially as an RB2 on my roster. So let me know in the comments down below how you guys are feeling about Alvin Kamara at this moment in the offseason. I'm really not worried about it, guys. I think he's a phenomenal fantasy value where you can go out and snag him. Overall, last season finished with 898 rushing yards, 4 touchdowns on the ground, 439 receiving yards off 47 receptions, and 5 touchdowns. And you think about the shift that this offense is taking with Jameis Winston coming back fully healthy and that receiving core just being revamped through the entire offseason. I think that Kamara is still going to be a huge part of this offense when he comes back healthy. And I think he's going to be a very nice security blanket for Jameis Winston as a whole. And on top of that, guys, think about it this way, right? Even if he misses the first 6 games of the season, the most important games in your fantasy football season are going to be during the second half of your season. And if you can secure Kamara for that potential playoff stretch and the stretch leading up to the playoffs, he is going to bring a ton of value to your fantasy roster. So similar to CMC, who we talked about at number 5, if you draft Kamara early and then you hit on the right running backs throughout your draft, he is going to bring a ton of value to your roster. So I've got no problem whatsoever putting Alvin Kamara at number 10 overall heading into the 2022 fantasy football season.